which is that time is speeding up, that human beings are part of that process, and that the culmination of that process is now within the van of historical time. In other words, I believe it will happen in 2012, in December, coincident with the same events that the Maya placed at the end of their calendar. Even if I'm wrong, even if it's 100 years or 500 years later, these are still spans of time that, when compared to the life of the planet, are fractions of a percentage. So whether you believe, as I do, that we can know the precise moment of this transformation of the world of time, or whether you believe it is simply coming soon and fast, really doesn't make that much difference. We are all gathered here at the end game of developmental processes on this planet. We are about to become unrecognizable to ourselves as a species. Our technologies, our religions, our science has pushed us toward this for thousands of years without us awakening to what the denouement would be. Now we stand close enough to it that I think all but the most lumpen among us must feel the tug of the transcendental and the transformative.
I am very perplexed when you say that time is speeding up. As far as I can tell, such things as crystal oscillators, things which keep time, clocks, the relationship of the Earth turning to the calendar, the full moon, all of the things which are symptoms of our passage through time, don't seem to be throwing themselves out of kilter. So what do you really mean about time speeding up?
Well, let me answer in the form of a question. Which lasts longer, 1,000,000 years in which nothing happens, or 10 seconds with 50,000 events crammed into it? In other words, really time is only experienced by the events which occur within it. And I maintain that the early universe had very little going on, and consequently time moved very, very slowly. The character of time as we approach the present is that there are more and more physical domains and energetic domains in which change can occur. For example, the early universe was a pure plasma, a pure swarm of unassociated electrons. You didn't even have atomic systems, let alone chemistry, molecular chemistry, life, complex speciated life, and dynamically balanced planetary ecosystems. Each one of those more complex phenomena crystallized out, or emerged, if you will, from the previous systems that had come into existence. So when I say time is speeding up, what I mean really is that more and more is happening. More and more is happening. And if you ask the question, well, what would be the ultimate state of connectivity or of happening? It's when all points are connected to all other points. Somehow this concept of connectivity is intimately linked to the concept of complexity. And so really what I'm saying is that the universe is getting its act together. It's connecting the dots. It's bringing everything into co-relationship with everything else. And somehow it does this through the production of consciousness. Consciousness is this integrative function in biology which takes data which may appear profoundly unrelated, and in fact brings it into some kind of a congruent relationship. We say an organism coordinates a point of view. Well, in a way, what's happening over time is that the universe is coordinating a point of view. And as it does this, it becomes somehow more aware, more self-conscious, more being-like and less thing-like. And as I said, this process is not proceeding at a steady pace. It's proceeding faster and faster. More connectivity occurs now in a calendar year than occurred in 1,000,000 years, 1,000,000,000 years ago. So somehow, as we approach the present, we find ourselves in an ever denser realm of activity, interrelationship, connectivity, and the result of this is more of the same, producing a shrinking globe, ever more immersive technologies, dissolution of political, social, gender, and class boundaries of all sorts. So that's what I mean when I say the universe is speeding up. You know, before the advent of man, of human beings, the fastest changes on this planet of any consequence were genetic changes in the genomes of plants and animals. Well, biologists know that for a fruit fly to add a spur to its leg, for a bird to change its plumage, you need hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of years of evolutionary time. With the advent of human beings using spoken language, a new kind of possibility was born. It's called epigenetic change. In other words, change which is not about genes, but which is about languages, customs, behaviors of human beings. Epigenetic change reaches its dramatic culmination in speech, writing, and communication of all sorts. And so the carriers of epigenetic change, the human beings, are automatically then the carriers of accelerated novelty. And so when you look at, let's say, evolution on a coral reef, and you compare it, let's say, to the evolution of political ideas in modern Europe, obviously modern Europe's rate of change in this domain is thousands of times faster. So by moving from the genetic to the epigenetic realm, we have vastly accelerated all kinds of processes. Now we appear to be about to move from the strictly human domain to the human-machine symbiosis domain. And of course, machines process information, make connections, and do their work at a rate thousands of times faster than any human being can work. So we see again a progressive acceleration of the process of creating and maintaining varieties of connectivity. And that's what I mean by time is speeding up.
Your description of the process by which you developed the time wave theory, I understand, I read True Hallucination, so I understand it took you some years to kind of work it all out.
Yes, in the Amazon, all was chaos and mythic revelation, but I knew that you couldn't bring that back as a scientific theory, and my bias has always been toward science. And out of these many intuitions and revelations, I discerned a thread which was about time. It began with a conversation with this Logos entity where it said to me, "Did you know every day is composed of 4 other days?" And I said, no, I not only didn't know that, it's never occurred to me. What a bizarre idea. Well, so this idea then of a time being a resonance created by other times, not immediately before or after it, as in scientific causality, but somehow a day centuries ago, centuries in the future, come together to create an interference pattern that creates the unique moment. So that was one of the basic assumptions. And then the structure on which this all was hung was the I Ching, which may seem exotic to American and European audiences, but which is, of course, as familiar to anyone in Chinese society as the Declaration of Independence is to us. And what is the I Ching? Well, it's a very ancient method of divining and predicting the future, based on the idea that every moment can be symbolized by a unique ideogram, which is somehow its essence, much in the way that science believes you can explain all nature with 108 elements. The ancient Chinese took the position that time itself was made of elements. My style of thinking is scientific enough that if I were to say to somebody, I propose a revolution in physics based on what I know about an ancient Chinese divinatory system, that would seem foolish to me. It seems occult. It seems unscientific. Why should an ancient Chinese book of divination hold any insight whatsoever for modern physics? But the uncanny thing about the I Ching is that it seems to work. Even in the hands of its critics, it seems to work. So let me try out a metaphor on you, which I think makes much more clear what's going on here. Visualize for a moment sand dunes, and notice when you look at these sand dunes in your mind that they look like wind. Sand dunes look like wind in some sense. Well, then analyze the situation. What is wind? Wind is a pressure variant phenomena that fluctuates over time. In a way, the sand grains moved about by the wind are like a lower dimensional slice of the wind itself. And from photographic analysis of dunes, you can calculate the speed and duration of the wind that made them. So the dune is a lower dimensional slice of time, of the wind ebbing and flowing that made it. Well, now let's change the metaphor a little bit. Instead of grains of sand, let's think of genes. Instead of a windstorm, let's think of 1 billion years of evolution. It moves the genes around in a pattern which is a lower dimensional slice of the force which created the situation. In other words, on every living organism, there is the imprint of the higher dimensional force which made it. Now, somebody could say, well, that's God. Well, but in a scientific context, we don't speak like that. But whatever it is that made blind matter into whales, squirrels, and human beings, it left its calling card inside each human being, each squirrel, each whale. That's the DNA. Well, the DNA codons are based on a system of 64, exactly like the I Ching. So my belief is that some group of people thousands of years ago looked into human organism, looked by meditative techniques into the center of their own beings. And they were not mystics, nor were they empiricists. They were simply curious. But at the center of the meditative experience, they saw an ebb and flow, an energy field that was in a constant state of flux. And they asked themselves, how many elements are necessary to describe this energy field? And the answer was more than 10, less than 1,000. More than 20, less than 500. And when they finally got it worked out, lo and behold, 64 situations are all the possible potential situations there are. Out of 64 subtypes of time, you can create everything from the coronation of Queen Mary to the resignation of Madonna, out of 64 types of time. So really, what the I Ching is not a book of Chinese mysticism. It's a book of molecular dynamics that sees through biology to the physics that allowed biology to come into existence. And I'll argue this with anybody in the field, regardless of how hardcore an empiricist they claim themselves to be, because I think the coincidence between the structure of the I Ching and the structure of the DNA is staggering. It's not a simple correspondence between 64 and 64. All the processes that occur in DNA can be easily modeled with the 6-line hexagrams that make up the I Ching. It's almost as though Western science was fascinated by energy. For 5,000 years we pursued understanding energy, and this process ends with thermonuclear explosions in the deserts of the American Southwest. We can light the fire that burns in the heart of the distant stars. We know how to do that. That's what the Western mind achieved, political issues aside. The Eastern mind was not interested in energy. It was interested in time. And they spent 5,000 years deconstructing it, looking at it, and you don't use atom smashers. You don't use enormous physical pressure. It's a different problem, and you bring different tools to bear. You meditate. You look inside yourself. You study the movement of water around pebbles. You consider the situation. You study history. In any case, the bottom line is, the people who pursued this understanding of time achieved as sophisticated a relationship to time as the Western relationship to matter expressed through our ability to trigger fusion and fission. So there's a great deal for us to learn in the West from these Oriental efforts to understand time, and it is not necessarily mystical. What I did was entirely mathematical. It's not transparent to a person who has not studied mathematics, but to a professional mathematician, it's utterly trivial. There's nothing occult about it. And I think true understanding can be communicated and formally described with mathematics. And that's what we have here. We're on the brink of a fusion of Western science with quote-unquote Eastern mysticism. Nothing mystical about it except that we call it mysticism. But the fusion of these two viewpoints is going to give us a complete understanding of the universe of space-time, matter, and energy.
I want to go to this stuff about the strange attractor at the end of history.
Right.
We never ever, considered that notion that we are being pulled as opposed to simply just going on forever and ever, and that's for sure something that
Well, in the 19th century, if you spoke of nature having a purpose, you were thought to be anti-evolution, because in the 19th century there was great pain to eliminate anything like preformation or teleology or purpose or God, all these things that they were trying to eliminate from evolutionary theory. And until very recently in scientific thought, the idea has been that events are pushed by the causal necessity embedded in the events which preceded them. In other words, if you ask the question, what is the most important event in terms of, or moment in terms of shaping this moment, the answer would be the moment just before this moment, because it hands on the energy, the space, the time. Recently, mathematicians have evolved what they call the notion of attractors, or strange attractors in some cases. And these are processes where a dynamic is not pushed by causal necessity from behind, but it's pulled by a point in the future. You could almost say, for example, if you release a ball bearing up near the rim of a bowl, that its attractor is the bottom of the bowl. And the ball bearing will roll down to the bottom, then halfway up the side, then up the side in shorter and shorter cycles until it finally comes to rest in the exact bottom of the bowl. Well, from the point of view of the new mathematics, the bottom of the bowl is a basin of attraction, and the ball bearing has fallen under its influence. So I have always doubted that evolutionary theory without purpose, without teleology, could produce as complex a world as we see around us in as short a time, 5 billion years, as the life of the Earth. It seemed more as though these processes were not just wandering across a flat genetic landscape. They were the process of biological evolution was actually being channeled between high walls. In other words, it could move. It had some motion this way, some this, but its forward direction was inevitable. And this is the idea of an attractor, that what the universe is doing is it is under the sway of what I call the transcendental object at the end of time. And that is this domain of hyperconnectivity, that it would be perfect novelty. And all nature aspires for this state of perfect novelty. You could almost say that nature abhors habit, and so it seeks the novel by producing various kinds of phenomena at every level in biology, chemistry, and society. And so there really is a purpose to the universe. Its purpose is this state of hypercomplexification in which all of its points become related to each other, become what mathematicians call cotangent. And it gives the universe the feeling of being imbued with a caring presence. It makes it appear as though nature is tending toward something, and it changes our own ethical and moral position in the universe. Because, science tells us that we're the products of a cosmic accident. We're at the edge of an ordinary galaxy in an ordinary star system, and we're damn lucky to be here. And that's it. That's our place, a very existential notion of our place in the cosmos. But if you take this other point of view, that process is under the influence of an attractor, and that the value the attractor is maximizing is novelty, then suddenly, for the first time in 500 years, human beings are moved back to the center of the stage, because we are the most novel thing on this planet. We are everything biology is, plus technology, language, politics, philosophy, art, so forth and so on. So suddenly human beings become important, not mere cosmic witnesses to a meaningless cosmos, but the cutting edge of a cosmos that glories in order and is moving toward higher states of order. And at the present moment, we are the carriers. Once it was the volcanic processes that shaped this planet. Once it was the life of the early oceans. Once it was the great dinosaurs. But today, humanity represents the cutting edge of complexity and this process of moving toward complexification. So it, without invoking God or any sort of myth, you give meaning to human life. What is man's purpose? To advance and preserve novelty. This is an ethical position. It means you don't replace rainforests with pastures. You don't censor books. You don't lean on people who make gender choices different from yours. No, the purpose of of being a human is to complexify reality even more, to hand on a more diverse, more complicated, more multifaceted universe to our children. And when this process of complexification reaches the omega point, it will fulfill, I believe, the expectations of all of these religions, but it will fulfill it in a mature, scientific, and universal way that these religions all lack, because they all reflect their parochial origins. It's certainly true that we see a limited slice of reality. And your example from Flatland, yes, anything which moves as a gradient through time, we will not discern very carefully. I mean, for instance, this is why we have the science of economics, because it keeps track of the behavior of markets, which is something you can't see or feel, but which has become very important to human institutions. It's a fourth dimensional factor that we need to coordinate into our planning. So we've created an entire science to study the movement and behavior of markets. One of the things, I'm always trying to visualize what the concrescence would be like, even though I know that in principle it's probably not possible to imagine it. But several factors are on the horizon which I think can be brought together to sort of get a picture of what we're headed toward. One is, for some time now, we've been involved in building complex prostheses, which we call machines and computers. They are part of us. We don't perceive them as part of us because we identify with the flesh and exteriorize the fabricated metal. But in fact, they are a part of us as much as our political systems, our agriculture production systems, so forth and so on. So the animal body has reached the limits of its evolutionary abilities. A cheetah can run 75 miles an hour, an elephant can lift 3 tons, and so forth and so on. To go beyond those capacities of the animal body, you have to make a marriage with mechanical things. So we are extending ourselves through the machines. Well, one of the things that these machines do is they're time compressors. You and I sitting here talking are operating at about 100 hertz. If we could be magically downloaded into a top-of-the-line computer, we would run at 800 megahertz. That means we could do 800 million more things in this moment than we can do when we're wearing flesh. So it may be that we will find a way to technologically stretch time, and this will become for us like a false eternity. You may have only 10 minutes left in your life, but it may be time enough to pack in all of human history from the fall of Rome to the present moment. So we are finding ways out of the three-dimensional Newtonian prison, which says, life is narrow and confined and ends at the grave. And we're doing it by becoming information that is freed from material. And somehow this allows us to make this ascent to the next dimensional modality. Information is not time and space constrained the way we are. We talk about the difficulty of moving
Your turret has been destroyed.
I am the will of man, unbound by flesh. Emotions are only distractions.
Aced. An ally has been slain. Your turret has been destroyed. Your turret has been destroyed. Your inhibitor has been destroyed. Your turret has been destroyed. Shut down. An ally has been slain. Your inhibitor has been destroyed. Enemy double kill. Your inhibitor has been destroyed. Your turret has been destroyed. Your turret has been destroyed. Enemy killing spree. A summoner has disconnected.